this topsy-turvy world, that's not a good sound. It may be pleasant, but it's not real. It may be what you want to do, but it isn't going to help. What we're looking at here is the idiom of the cricket being silent against oppression, tyranny, whatever, all the nastiness of the world. And again, as you watch people not understanding it or being insane, they're incapable of responding. Come here behind Woodshed every week to try and explain, at least at the official side, the government side, governmental issues that are infesting us and parasitically eating off of our substance. I can't believe you read the Declaration of Independence and you find out they're still doing the same thing. Never went away. And a lot of that is based on the fact that people have taken advantage of people that don't respond. And that's the silence that I keep talking about. And so we come here to say, hey, we don't have to take it anymore. There's tools. I've done a lot of research, decades and decades of research. I've went through the landmines, the field of woe, the valley of the death, and come through to be able to see different avenues of what we see as remedy, not solution. That's what they want you to do. The solution's tied to a whole method of destruction. You want to find remedy. And so this is what I try to bring every week. This will be BTW-RLM 304 for those of you on pastcast, recast, postcast, whatever the cast is, that you're hearing this file after the fact of the live presentation. Again, every week I come here, I've dedicated myself to be able to be here, and so far so good. But it wouldn't have been without Grimner and RealLibertyMedia.com and the things that Grimner does. And this is the official annual fundraiser. For those of you down in Arkansas, it's fundraiser. So we have to pay the bills. And I found this little story here real interesting, coincident with this condition of, we got to pay the bills, we got to keep it going. And it's such actually a little amount that RLM requires. We have to get the servers, we got to pay for the domains. There's maybe I think a little bit extra for paying for the hardware that breaks down, and Grimner does that out of his own goodness of his heart. No different than to my understanding, there's nobody on the network as even as scant as it might be, those few of us that show here to be able to stream to you, we don't get paid. It's strictly for the hardware to keep us up in streaming, getting the word out. And so it's not really a lot. And I didn't know. See, I'm a little bit out of touch in a lot of this stuff. And a long time ago, when I realized what the FRN was, I realized it was poison. And so it's not like I can't use it. I don't use it. There's the truth and the rubber meets the road. But I limit as much as I can, where I can, the use of the systems that are in place that bring us into the servitude. And I keep saying we got to return back at least to gold and silver money. And I'm skeptical of the new coin, the virtual so-called digital coin, crypto coin, for a number of reasons. I'm not against the technology, and I've said it before, I could benefit probably from that type of a system. But it's got some real major problems that I don't think people are looking at, and I think maybe in the future as it moves along, those problems are going to be resolved so that it can come to become maybe the thing that it's supposed to be or can be. But we in the meantime, there's lots of ways to donate to RLM to keep all this stuff going that keeps my voice going. And like I said, I didn't know. I mean, I'm just outside of it. Money doesn't. I know it's required. I know you need to have it. I wouldn't be able to function if I wasn't given donations myself periodically to keep going. I stopped looking at it all. I stopped trying to focus on that because I knew it was a trap. I didn't get into all the stuff you could do to get money from the internet through the different various paying systems. I'm really kind of stuck in the back a bit about having merchant account, so you could get a merchant account and then they give shared merchant accounts. That's really where my mind stays. Why not? Why isn't that good enough that all these other pay systems came on? Well, that's a good thing for a lot of people right now because they're all into that. So it's really easy to donate. I didn't know how much this internet. There's the people that are running the information out, there's just a ton of money that goes into it. And I had no clue. But here's a little clue we got in the same week. Coming through reference to Jerome Corsi being sued by, I think it is, or suing, excuse me, the Washington Post, and through the affiliation with InfoWars, to show you how much money's going on in every other place that you're not covering at all at Real Liberty Media. Corsi, I'm shocked at this stuff. I wouldn't see this value in years and years, and this is going on when you see what it's being. I mean, there's really no real reason for it. But Corsi has filed a legal complaint with the Washington Post in response, which includes the site's owner, Jeff Bezos. The former InfoWars employee claims the payments were hush money and were cut off because he opened his mouth. But Big League Politics had reviewed the documents from InfoWars that revealed Corsi was relieved of his duties at InfoWars in June of last year. Corsi has continued to receive payments of $15,000 a month from InfoWars as severance. How would you like that, Grimner? $15,000 as severance, and you could just secretly help us behind the scenes. How would you like $15,000 a month? Well, maybe $15,000 in 10 years would be nice. But at any rate, $15,000 per month for InfoWars as severance without having any work duties or in order to pay out his agreed upon contract. The contract expires on January 31st, where payments are scheduled to cancel. Anyway, stop right there. This is the kind of money that's being spent to bring you information, and in my view, it's inferior. Yes, there's some information. Everything comes. All this stuff comes with a little bit of truth. In my mind, none of it comes with how you go about stopping this problem that you see coming on you. And I don't know of any other place. I've heard of other places. I've heard of how people engage. I don't know of any other place than behind the woodshed that you're going to get the actual nuts and bolts on the ground of the real things that are behind the scenes of what's problematic in our society at this point to address. Not just that it's there, but how you start making it. Well, how you take responsibility to do certain things. And when I hear $15,000 per month as a severance on a contract, that's a lot of vitamins, folks. That's a lot of iodine pills. And that's just one guy who ain't working on InfoWars. And so, without making this go too long, we don't do this much. RLM, Grimner does not do this very much. Once a year, we try to get the money into donations. Thank you very much for the initial donations I asked for last week. A couple of you stepped in, and thank you very much for that before this started off. Yeah, Grimner, I know, me too. $15,000 a month for doing nothing. But you can there's lots of ways to pay. Grimner's saying his PayPal, I think it was, is very easy. You don't even have to do anything. I guess my thought when I heard it, and I don't know too much about it, but when I heard it, there's these, what are they called, American Express cash cards that you can get. And you can put money on the card, and then you put the money in, then you can use the electronic payment. So let's say if I could do that, if I had the bucks to do that, I would get that American Express, because I don't have bank accounts, I have none of that stuff. I'm really kind of isolated about doing it. It does make it kind of a pain, but there's still options. And so those of you that may not be wanting to connect up, I find that's an interesting way to make a payment, and I suppose that you can make a payment right into the PayPal. There's other crypto coins that Grimner will accept. In fact, I just again, the Doge of War is my take on the Dogecoin. It's maybe not real popular, but it's still plugging along. Those of you that might be into that. Anyway, there's lots of ways to give us what you can, folks. It's going to be a little bit tougher this year, I think. I've been hearing, and it looks like it is. The donations are kind of slow at this point, but it's not that much. It's not $15,000 a month. It's not $15,000 over 10 years. It's not $1,500 a year, folks. What we're asking, I think Grimner's asking, would be, I think it's around $400 or $500 when you get everything all totaled up. It may be a little bit less, but that shouldn't be a whole lot. Of everybody listening to me, and even through the people who do the reproductions and all that, those of you that listen there, if you could consider whatever you can. It's not, if you don't have it, I don't have it, so there you are. We'll stand in line and say, we'll look sheepish, and I do what I do in lieu of the money, right? There's also contributions that we can do that aren't money. But right now, money is needed to keep the servers, to keep the domain, to do the hardware upgrades, I'm sure. to do all these incidental things I probably don't even know about. And it's all really confined to and the stream. I forgot about the streaming. And then as I think about that, I don't do it enough. Grammy Mary, thank you for your donations every month, as I understand it, to Spreaker. And so everybody can do something somewhere, I suppose, that can. And this is the month we ask. And so this is the only time you'll hear me. I'm going a little bit long here, and maybe you want to hear me go on, but this is important. If we don't get the bills paid, this goes dark, too, on its own. And there's no support. See, this is the whole problem. And I know the listeners have been pretty generous in the past, and I don't think I need to really ask more. You do what you can. But I think we need to spread the word a little bit more if we can and get more in so that, again, I mean, if you were limited even to what we get sent in, there's no budgeting to do. There's nothing to look in advance the exposure of the network or the word that comes out of it. And again, as I say that, any of you that have content that's in good shape, bring it on. There's plenty of space on the RLM. And if the point is it's not even really when the space is, it's that you get to make a file that people can hear down the road. It's like it's archived, what you do. And that's partly what makes it helpful for me. I can sit here and do live better than I could, well, because of my time constraints, better than I wanted to originally to do post-produced content. That just takes way too much time. It takes a team, as we were talking last night in the chat. And thank you for that team that I have at this point, and we all do here at RLM. But if we want to do bigger and better, we really have to bring some people in to help us in that regard. And so there's another contribution that could be done outside the money. But if we don't get the $300 to $500, whatever that is, initially we don't have a network. It's pretty simple. And we're not I don't think Grimner's anywhere else. There's no ads, there's nothing. It's just what you will do. So thank you very much for those that have. I think we're going to go forward into the month asking it. Yeah, I'm getting a notice from the chat that Gramsci shells out $20 every month and does great shows here on RLM. So you can too, folks. So there's wherever you can fit. I appreciate everything that comes in. I don't even know what to say. It's just amazing to watch that it does hold together from year to year. It's pretty a neat thing. So that's we don't have the overhead at RLM. Grimner he doesn't ask for it. Might be asking for it, but no, he's not asking for much. And so I don't know that's why that's such a big problem for people. When I see $15,000 a month to do nothing at InfoWars, and I see the type of thing that they produce there, which doesn't really get you into doing a darn thing. It's like I see on the Twitter now, people, and I'm happy to see it, but there's no response. People are asking, what do we do? Let's say like one the Twitter came through. Okay, now we know how bad 5G is. What do we do? Well, no one had an answer to the gentleman that did that. He looked like, on his picture, he looked like a young kid. Perfect specimen. Coming up young, wanting to know what to do, folks. Not just what to know, but now we know what to do. And so I offered a Twitter. I said, this is what you begin to do. Well, he hasn't responded back. It's been a few days. And the point is that that's the disconnect. It's what do you want to do about it is really where we have to go. That's what I've been doing for 10 years now, telling you what you can do about it. And once you jump in, then you see what you will have to do with it when I give you the generalities of what it's going to start to take. Maybe just like I said, I don't do stuff because I like to do it. I don't write paper. I don't research all this time. I don't sit here to figure this stuff out. But when I realized there was a war against us and we were being parasitically fed on by these people that would come under color of authority of government and hurt us under that same color of authority, I said, well, I better focus my attention there and figure out what it is in order to stop it. In other words, it's just another crime. It's the highest type of crime we could be suffering, and suffering means we still live with it. We don't throw it off. And there's lots of it. I've told you over and over about this broadcast, how you can, I don't care where I look in, the things that are not made up by people in their mythologies of what's supposed to go on, but you look at the history of how it all comes together, why we're here, how we're here, that we're here, not all the incidental stories, but what it means to be here by those paths. And you see you see how negative it's turned out. Again, the cock has started. The worst rises to the top and seems to gain advantage. And it only does that because we've heard the other people. There's been much more intelligent people than me in the past. That rises up because we don't be chopping at the roots of the problem. We don't end the crime against us. And so we have to step up. I don't care what people come up with until we focus in not amongst ourselves, but we focus on the things that are not right and to work them out on how they need to be stopped and then stop them. We're going to be suffering some serious stuff coming, and I don't know. I think this year, I don't like to be doom and gloom, and I don't like to be predictive or prophetic, but I just get, they've really got us in the right way right now. We are not responding in the way we need to respond, and it's funny when we do, as I say all the time, when we do respond and we respond in the proper way. Again, we make a proper record, not just any whining and complaining record. We make a proper record, but we stand there facing them and witnessing to whoever's coming against us in wrong. And that could be not even us, but a whole lot of people. Like when I talk about Jefferson Mining District, if you look at some of the statements on the website, we work to protect all producers. A miner is no different than a farmer, rancher, or timber, or any of the other raw materials producers. And they all have a land connection. And because the miners is absolutely in the land connection, the law of the land, it's very easy to turn back out and say what works for the miner works for all raw materials producers. That's from every one of y'all live from these things. And so this has all been undermined by the things in the system. And you may not be aware of that, and you may not care, because every day you get to go down to the store or whatever, you get to go down to the hardware store and buy what you need. That's the surface stuff. And then there's the more insidious thing working to undermine and parasitically feed from your life. That makes you look around and you say, well, how did it all come here? So Grimner provides a platform that we can get the word out. I'm telling you what I've seen for 3 decades of research, how we got here, why we got here, that we're here and doing things that people don't, is all transparent to people. They don't even see it. And yet I see stuff. I see dead things. Well, you want to talk about these corporations being dead? I see them. I see them in ways you don't even have a clue about until you jump in, and then you'll have the eyes to see as well. Until that, I'll either sound like a lunatic, I'll not be interesting, I'll have nothing to talk to you about, you'll argue with me, and all kinds of things. And that's what the other side wants, is they want us to be not focused on each other. It's funny, as I was thinking about the progressiveness of the inclusion, we start seeing how it goes into governments. This thing that we're up against, it tries to bring everybody together, but you find out it's on an oppressive level of governance, not government. And then the governance has no guidance but themselves. And then we forgot really what good government could be. And I'm not really a guy that says that government means mind control. Yeah, you can play those games. Otherwise you can look at what the reality is. And when you see how it functions, it's not really mind control. I guess it could control your mind. But the point was, we were supposed to be the educated mass that was vigilant against all that. So, again, 3 fingers pointing back to us for everyone that points out. But anyway, getting out of the semantics of the potentials and give us excuses to argue, there's an organizational structure that we've come to figure out that's better than when we didn't have it. It's been adulterated. We allow the worst to rise up, and we allow that to then impact our lives. And that's going to continue until we stop it. And it doesn't take a real rule to do it, but it does take a nobility, if you will. And I don't mean that in the, as we think about crowns and things. There's a certain inner nobility and spirit that we need to maintain. It's not really even, the euphemism of taking the high road, it's not really even that. It's even beyond that. But we have to address this. In my mind, is like if you were around, I guess, in the 70s, there was this notion of diplomacy in the world that, even though during the Cold War, in fact, I think that's why we could see it, there were some real diplomats in the world that really worked out some real problematic things. And you could see that's, if you will, that nobility. Really, people didn't want to pull the trigger, even though the triggers everyone was pointing a gun at each other like that, like you see in some of the memes. So there's a whole different way to approach this, and it's up to us to do that. And so we need good information, though, and we don't need to be putting our money into tablets, paying off people that don't do work. And then what kind of work do? They all of a sudden start infighting. The inclusive, as I said, the inclusive psychology, the inclusive condition is really an exclusivity. that if you don't agree with the inclusive opinion, the alternative, this is that consensus process already working. Eventually, you will be targeted. Well, the purpose of inclusivity will cause a complete destruction inside that, because it's how finite, how resolute do you get down before everybody's being violated somehow by some opinion somewhere? So that whole thing is what you're allowing to happen, and when that blows up, that's going to be a whole other type of problem. And if we don't have those of us that are trying to figure this thing out and get it more back into some principles laid out, that's really going to cause some turmoil. I mean, some real big stuff. It's already showing itself. But anyway, so we need information. We don't need to see, buy tablets. You don't have to do that behind the woodshed. You don't have to do that with RLM. But we do need information that's good. And then we find out that those, like I said, we look out in the world, and those, the kakistocracy of the world, those that are the authorita that puts themselves up, they're not beyond. They're there because it's, for the most part, I can't see this as absolutes. There's never these absolutes. But for the most part, they're there to keep your confidence, aren't they? We hear this. I mean, I talk about this all the time. You've probably heard it in lots of other places. They keep your confidence. It's a confidence game. You've heard me talk about this all the time. It's in what I'm speaking to. They get you to believe the alternative has some bearing, and you have confidence that it does, and you engage it like it's real, and that was the trap. And so we need this information. We tend to look toward governments and government institutions as having some kind of thing, as you hear behind the woodshed all the time, and anybody listens to this network on any length of time, you realize that those are experts say. Well, it's easy to say that. It's easy to have opinion. Like I've told you, it's always nice to get their admission to it. And so here we have, going over to Japan, the information that we're getting from places that looks like it's authority, has a lot of money to spend in places, has a lot of budgeting that goes into things as frivolous as paying people to contracts that they're not doing a darn thing on. What was the insight there in all of that anyway? When you look at how did that even come that comes to that point? Everyone seems to be a player where there's money involved. And so here we are, Japan data scandal. Tokyo admits 40% of its economic data is fake news. Well, I've told you before, this fake news term is really kind of getting on me. I think that's set up to cover this other thing that it really is, and I think those of us that are looking at this stop using the term fake news. Now, we would qualify it if we use it, but in this case, we're looking at outright fraud. And worse, we can go on and on about the list of list of crimes that this is. But this is not fake news. This is fraud. Fraud done by a governmental institution in Japan. And they did it because they wanted to keep the confidence of the market. So now we see by their own admission they did it. They did it for a reason. What that reason is what they need to keep in you and everyone else in every subject matter is confidence in that system. And your confidence is kept by you continuing to use it, you continuing to engage it, you not, more importantly, actually calling it out. Like I'm trying to say here, if I haven't said it, I'll say it again. It's not fake news what comes out of a governmental data system. That's fraud. And because it's the government, it's the highest fraud. It's the worst that they can do. And then it touches the markets, which is all a fraud anyway. So then you start to go back and, okay, what's the deal here? Well, it's all a fraud. And we did that when we moved into the fiat systems, and we allowed all this stuff. And we allow that because we, the people, the men and women, don't start to get principled and work in the construct of the real, the tangible. Again, these numbers are statistics. What's the climate change but a statistical relationship theory that does none of it is reality. And so it's faked. It's easy. It's fraud, as I call climate change. It's outright fraud, folks. It's not fake news. But see, this is what the system does. We better make a term that isn't what it is so it focuses on everybody, and we make it a catchphrase, and everybody buys into that catchphrase. Oh, they're handy. Yes, they're cool. But it keeps our mind, it traps our mind from what's really going on. Now, what are we going to do with Japan? Nothing. What we do is we see that they've admitted they do this stuff. And then you see the system that didn't respond to that fraud. It's all a setup, folks. It's all this fiction that's going on, and you want to complain about the fiction, but no one really steps up to start interjecting themselves to stop it. All these lies that have been told to us, the reflexive answers that come through so-called judiciaries, the presumptions made upon the authority that Japan would tell you the truth through various branches of the government, which now you see are really in a way irrelevant. As I told you when the murder memo acknowledged years before in a letter from a bar member attorney justifying that indefinite detention, throwing Lieber to the curb, doing what? Moving from multiple branch government administration, of that one of which would protect the judiciary was supposed to protect. They kicked even the judiciary to the curb to move into what? Executive expedience. On what a bureaucrat says. And we're not, again, that's what I told you. I went to crickets. When we as a society did not respond to it, like nobody responded to the Japan statement that 40% of their data was fraud. When the people of America didn't move on the notice that they were going to remove their government, I went, crickets, we're done. We're done. What else do you call it? But here, the society, did what the market did in Japan. We did nothing. We did nothing. And then we took on the imposition of the occupier now that is just the executive, no different than Lincoln, as I told you. That's where they got all this stuff. And they move into war powers. It's all predictable here from there on out. And I've been looking at some other stories, some reports and stuff. This Andrew Johnson declaration is the folks, we've been done. We've been done. There's no ending of what they imposed in the Civil War, which was total enslavement. Again, what do you see that? It's not my opinion, folks. It's just what I read this stuff. I still can't believe I read this years and years ago. It still drops my jaw a bit. When you go read Title 42 USC 1981 and really read it. And your equal rights are for punishments and pains and penalties, folks. Taxes and fees, exactions, wrongful extortions. And Grimner made a comment last week, there's a rightful extortion. Well, apparently there is, because there's a definition that says exactions is wrongful extortion. I don't make this stuff up. I just read it and kind of take notice of it. And then I got to put it into a reality of some sense. I don't make stuff up. I don't mythologize everything. Because we have to learn to cut through this and take it for what it is, not what we make up out of it. That's one of the techniques that you have to, when you take responsibility, you got to take it like it is. You can't just disregard it because you make it up some other way. Oh, it ought to be that way, and so that's because it's not. I don't need to listen to the rest. No, that when you did that, the other takes advantage and continues. And the governance model of that, the method, understands that absolutely. It's so ingrained now in society, that thing, that's what they call it, transparency. They want to maintain transparency, so they want to maintain so that you don't see this stuff. And we go along and these laws are made up, and we think all this stuff is helping us. And like I pointed out to you there, your equal rights aren't what you think they are. Moving on now, we get another piece of fake news. Another fraud comes out. Older job applicants not protected by age-biased laws, says U.S. Appeals Court. Now, I'm not getting much credence to the Appeals Court. I told you all these district courts that move on through, other than the two I've told you that are not United States district courts but are constitutional courts, there are only two out there, and there are only two districts that have it. And a couple of you have researched it, and you know exactly what I'm talking about, which just thrills me to no end, just that you know that. And how this comes around. Now, do you realize that all these courts are incompetent? Not incompetency, they're incompetent in law and subject matter and establishment. And the officers in those are also incompetent as to the extent that they rule over that. When you realize that, you won't look at these U.S. Court of Appeals cases the same in a way, but you realize that other people do, and there's a lot more of them than you. When they say older job applicants are not protected by age-biased law, should by its title, be oxymoronic in its decision. And a long time ago, I don't know where it came from, a long time ago when I was a lot younger, I said, the system, that was before I even been paying attention, this system's not really set up that by the time we get there, it's going to be much. Well, I think this pretty well proves it to us. I don't think this is really the way it works. This is what they're pushing now. Remember I told you were going to be elder at 46. You read this article, and they say they're actually getting discrimination at 36. So that you're going to have even a 10-year drop-off from there. When you become elder, you don't now, if this holds up, you will no longer be able to be protected as you get older. And what does that allow the system to do? But suck from you even more, because now you have no place really to produce a stable way to make your living, what they call income. And now they get to condition the slaves one more time. All right, this is what comes up. And there was a statement made inside the article that was describing this condition. And I'm just going to read that, because you can read these articles. I'm trying to read you the high points to show you the world coming on to you. It was all predictable. I had the thought about this a long time ago. I never thought about there would be anything for me when I got to where I was going to need the help. Even these age discriminations, you'll look and they're for a particular class. They're now telling us that. But there was a statement made that I interpreted that the woman who was discussing it, and don't get triggered because I use the word a woman, please. There's a woman that said, what's most ironic, she notes, is that the ruling punishes workers for being highly qualified. And so I say, see, she doesn't understand, folks. Did you understand how this works? The ruling that made by the appellate court punishes workers. Well, they're workers. They're master-slave employment servitudes, first of all. Secondly, she says the ruling punishes highly qualified. Well, what have I said about the courts have said the same thing relative to cops. You can be too intelligent and too psychologically stable to be a cop. So this decision is absolutely consistent when you look at it correctly. Exactly consistent with what they said about cops. But what's another point here? So they're highly qualified doesn't mean anything in the world. You can be too intelligent, psychologically stable to be a cop, but what does she say here? The ruling punishes workers. This woman speaking about this case doesn't understand what equal rights or civil rights are. Isn't it state right in there at 42 U.S.C. 1981 that your equal rights are punishments, pains, and penalties? So when she says the ruling punishes workers, they're just enjoying their equal rights unequally. And if you start getting your head wrapped around that truth, the whole world starts to, like I said, your brain should flip up inside. You should feel like your brain's flipping inside of its skull to try and make sense, orient itself in a way it can understand. We're trying to rationalize and make sense of insanity. And worse, crime. The crime of having someone say they have a license to harm you, and that's okay. That's legalization. So this article talks about you don't have older rights. They're not for you. And they're not determined by you. They're determined by the system and determined by the employer, the master, in the master-slave relationship. And I'm suggesting to you, look very carefully, those of you that are 36 and 34, you're moving out of the time when you're going to be protected. And the elders, I kept telling you were 46, you're going to be done. And then I want you to look at the world in your future about that when the doors are being closed like they might be, as they also probably are turning down the economy as well. How are you going to protect yourself against that? Maybe to look at things more tangible. Maybe. When they pull the rug out big time, it's going to be, you better have some people that you can work with together real fast, because that's, I think, the only ultimate savior, is that you exist together to be able to supply yourself with most of the things you need and work with other people to supply the rest. And that continues your, if you will, your commerce. But it's in the natural commerce, not the one that they've been regulating. So I see these stories written a little bit better. They're telling us the truth, but they're telling us a lie. You got to know, put yourself where, if you don't have any control of this, And this is going in that, this is a reflexive decision. In a court that I would tell you is incompetent, I don't say it because I say it, the statutes tell me that appeals court is deciding a USDC court, district court decision, which is incompetent. Its appeals are incompetent, and the only time that you're going to get into this, likely, will be to try and get an Article 3 court convened, which, interestingly, comes from the same district as this appeals court. But this is the Washington, I think this was the case with the Washington District, D.C., District of Columbia Court of Appeals Court Circuit. The District of Columbia Circuit, what you needed to get is the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals. That's where the Article 3 court is, at least at the appellate level, which means that there may not be any actual access to the Article 3 Constitutional Court at the district court level. And this is start to blow your mind a bit. If you never thought about, never heard of this, I've blown away everybody. I've lost all of you. This is how they're doing it. And when you start getting rolled into how they do this, to see this, you have to see this in order to look at the end game, if you will. You want to talk about end games? This is the end game. Not the one they're telling you out at InfoWars. This is the end game. You have to figure this one out. And this is actually not there is no end game, actually. There's lots of avenues. Remember, it's multidimensional, so that's another trap. The only end game is the occupier wins, and the way the occupier wins is if you keep crickets, or you are crickets. So, if you read this, you see these workers being punished by the ruling are actually enjoying their equal rights. If you please wrap your head around the truth of that. Don't just, oh, that's kind of interesting. No, think really, sit down and, how is that? You're going to be lost because you got no basis, but think about it anyway. See, once I started to, when I came through and I started to realize what Lincoln had actually done, and what Lieber Code was telling us, and what the proclamations didn't do, what they claimed to be doing, like the fake news there, that was all fraud as well. Fully disclosed fraud is on top of it all. I realized this thing takes on a whole other way that needs to be interpreted. And then I realized, who am I to even do that? I better start creating potentials, possibilities, plausibilities, and just keep them in categories and keep them all running and fluid, because I don't really know what I'm actually looking at. I can tell you, when you put those together and you get a seated decision that's going to fall into that line of reasoning, you will come out with this decision. This decision really doesn't surprise me. When I didn't know anything, I figured it would be like this. And when I started to figure stuff out, I can tell you why the ruling punishes workers. And why it turns out that you don't have the rights you thought you would have had. Why it sounds like an oxymoron that an act that was supposed to protect against age bias is actually prejudicing age. Again, look at this. When it stopped making sense, folks, you've got to step back and say, well, how do I make sense of it? I'm not saying what the sense is that you make is right, what you determine, finally. I'm saying that's reality. It may not be right. And then there's another thing that came to my mind. And then you missed the whole point as well. Another point. You live in this cage that's controlled. So there's a whole lot of things that are going on. When I talk about stuff, I don't even know how much even gets out to people, what I'm actually talking about. And I don't even touch it because I only got a few minutes. I move on and this, that, and the other. When someone wants to make it important, and some of you have and some of you will communicate, you start to hear in further explanation when you take it down the road you need, how this thing is really wired. And you realize there is no really other way to think about things. And so, what do I say? If you don't understand what I just said, if you don't believe me, it means nothing. If you know what I'm saying and you agree, then I'm asking those of you that agree, let's roll it up and do a little bit more work, and let's start to work in places. Exercise the knowledge that we have into action. You don't have to take a big bite of anything. Just find something to start becoming a little more functional in a society that's been planned to go insane. And the only way I can figure out, there's no foundation. So the answer is to bring a foundation. Now, what better foundation has I found for producers, raw material producers? It's the law of the land, not the law of the land mentioned in a piece of paper in a parchment. No, the literal law of the land, the things that's protected in you on the ground. And that has really been a nice the literal and figurative foundation from which I respond, and my colleagues respond. That really settles down the whole problem, and you cut through all this insanity, the whirlwind, the tumult, the turmoil. How much, like I've asked before a long time ago, what is the true value of turmoil? How much is a barrel of turmoil worth? To them, it's beyond measure the value when you get into it. Them. Because you're in the turmoil. They're not in that barrel. You are. The value of that is beyond measure. And what's interesting, if you go into a court and you say it's priceless, you don't have a cause. Think about that. And think about the commercial nature of your courts. They're your courts. The ones that were supposed to be set up so when you did have, neutrally, when you were supposed to go, when you had a problem with your neighbor, you go in and you get it worked out by a neutral party. If you will, an arbitration process. What we didn't realize, we didn't understand that. We didn't understand its subversion, its occupation. Then we didn't understand that they created an alternative to that called alternative dispute resolution that looks identical. That I find fascinating. The people that want to talk about libertarianism and or anarchy, they want to run to those systems. And I found back in 1993 in a court case that we won on appeal, 1993, folks, I was writing paper against this imposition, and we beat that case, showing that they could not impose this alternative dispute resolution, which is arbitration, on someone who has an at-law problem. Ironically, if it's an ironic condition, that imposition was found invalid. They removed it from the judicial side. They put it and exalted it into the executive side, also the Bar Association, and gave it to the universities. If you think that went away because we stopped it, I guess I want to repeat that. I was writing that paper back in 1990, I think it was 93, 94, somewhere in there. I've been here a little bit to see this stuff, folks. I don't know how I got there to do that I'm still talking about that in a different way as implemented through a different fact, but this is what you're under. This is how they do it to you. And the people that they are these people like the Bar Associations. They're making the decisions. The judges are Bar Association members. They're making these decisions. They hold to a global structure. You look at your the rulers that you think are representing you, the leaders they call these leaders that hold the hooks that grab the groupers in the herds of fish that come around, mouth breathing. They are lawyers for the most part. Attorney, you can't call them lawyers. They don't do law. They do legalisms. And they have their system, and you have to interfere with that system in the way that it's there to interfere with. There's a narrow thread of the way you interfere and expose it. That's all I've probably ever been trying to show you in all these broadcasts through talking all these different things, is just trying to get you to see, look, just respond in this way and go after this, and you will be on the path that is your shield, it's fully lighted roadway that they can't encroach. There's no highway robber there that can come on, and when they do, they're exposed for the highway robber that they are. And I get very little people that understand that or take it on. And so we, again, information's important. It's not fake news, folks. You got to learn about being honest disclosure, open disclosure, full disclosure. And you get these people that are in the government we find out that look, if Japan can lie, do you think any other country is going to lie? Sure. I mean, this is the whole point. Let's get rid of this new nonsense, and it's even a question. See, this is the presumption that's been set up that these so-called sovereign power is the truth. That's another fraud. Call it out, but have the point. Here's proof. Japan will do it. We can find other indications. Every other government does it. Well, I always have serious problems with the way they do that with our health. And I wanted to point out something that also came up in this idea of talking about authority coming forward to give you information to promote what ends up being propaganda and or a program to harm you or could harm you when you look in depth of it. And this all at the same time comes up with, well, so Japan's talking about lying about their economic data. You as an older worker, an older meaning just above 36, they say. So be careful on who you think is not being affected, all you youngsters out there. Generation Z, I'm sorry, I'm doing my best here. You may have to pick yourself up on your own bootstraps here, but you'll have some guidance even in the future with what I'm telling you. Given you have a responsibility left in you and the ability to do that. That we are told this information that's wrong. We have to cut through it. I want to point out something else because it seems to be we're being propagandized that the flu season is on us and this is the height of it. I kept being confused. I thought they said that in December. They keep telling you that you got to get your vaccination. So they come out. The CDC in a report pops out with this information. This was out of the DickinsonPress.com, which I thought had a vulgar twist to it. You make that out as you will. With the way we see this information being really terrible, wrong, misinformed, misguided from sources that if you look at the facts or the details of how it's given to you are telling you something in all ways. In the report, the CDC states that vaccination prevents 2.3 million deaths a year. So why do people choose not to vaccinate their children? The CDC states in its report that an advisory group, so if you've been listening to me at all, you know advisory groups are system originated for system purposes. All right? This is real easy to see when you start reading this stuff. An advisory group to the World Health Organization, not even a government body. That's the WHO, right? Not the WHO, as the rock group, or an owl, but the World Health Organization. Identified complacency, inconvenience in accessing vaccinations, and a lack of confidence as key reasons. And so here, the point of this is not just the fact they want to maintain in every instance, they want to maintain your confidence. That's the key. They're trying to combat this wave of anti-vax. And I said, see, they pigeonhole people into anti-vax when all we want is full disclosure. And they really can't do that. But they want to bring on one of a Stanford health pediatrician, Nabil Manzar, who is also assistant professor, academia here, of pediatrics at University of North Dakota, and he addressed some of the myths about vaccinations. And he mentions a couple of things here, goes through, talks about the MMR vaccine and this and that and the other, and talks about in a Lancet article, it comes right out of the gate talking about that Dr. Wakefield Lancet article that was pulled as an authority. And uses that. This is a current document that uses this guy talking against Wakefield, and that he says that Wakefield was found to be wrong. And then he goes on to argue the thimerosal and all these other things. I've told you, be careful when they argue something. They can argue the truth of thimerosal, but they aren't pointing to the other things that are maybe and probably, and as my research shows, are actually the untalked about things are causing trouble. That he mentions the Wakefield coming out of the gate. This Dr. Wakefield is such a problem that he brings it out and says that this guy was destroyed by a judicial case and all this, and a board that took away his license and all this other stuff. If any of you saw this article that came through about the CDC, you looked at this and you're interested in this, you need to go back over and find the article that talks about the fact that the Lancet eventually acknowledges that Dr. Andrew Wakefield was cleared of the profession's complaints, and a court showed that the one that Wakefield worked with was essentially defamed by the people saying their work was no good. That this pediatrician does not full disclose to you by saying that Wakefield was wrong. And this is coming in together to promote from using a CDC report as viable information for you to make decisions and trying to break down the building resistance because of a lack of confidence in people. My problem with, again, as I'm saying this, my problem with this is that they are willing to do that. In other words, Japan just told you they've been going for years. They got 40% errors in all their stuff just to keep the confidence of the market. Similarly, CDC comes out with its report just to keep confidence in the system, and then they talk about what people believe are myths. I guess that's another term for the word, another example of the term, I guess, gaslighting. No, you don't understand. You don't know what you know. You don't know what, you don't understand what you think you know. No, it's not what you think. It's not what you research. You have no experience. I'm a pediatrician. The guy is completely lying. He's committing fraud. He's committing fraud in the statement of attacking Dr. Wakefield. And I don't know Dr. Wakefield. I don't even know much more about the report, the story. I just know what I've read. But it's clearly, you look at the evidence, Wakefield was exonerated. And this guy is committing the fraud in the statement and the fraud in the omission to make the disclosure. And so if you go back to Japan, where they're admitting now that they did 40% errors just to keep the confidence, well, now they're no longer doing the fraud of omission because they come out and they told you. It's almost like how the Clean Water Act works. If you say you dumped the pollution in the river, in the creek or whatever, beyond what the regulations were, then you're not going to be held for your sin. Doesn't matter how bad you polluted the river because you told us. And this is how, when you start seeing how this thing works, that's another example of how I don't think people appreciate, like I said, the Clean Water Act is not an act to clean water. It's an act that allows the pollution of water just so much. Why? Because it's a reality. We can't have production. We can't produce for a society absolutely without certain types of waste. Now, we would be best to deal with that. We haven't been in the past. Partly why the Clean Water Act was working. But ultimately, you look at it, and it's really not an act to clean water. We're not going to make the so-called pristine rivers. That's not what it's about. It's about finding a limit, again, legalization of pollution. And I guess that's the key right there, what I just said about when we talked about legalization of anything, in particular cannabis. It's the criminalization to some extent. If it's in the civil side, it's penal, criminal, go to jail with fines. Again, your civil equal rights. If it's civil, administrative, then it's fines. And if you really resist it could be crime. They kick you over. But it's within the regulation authority, which means that they're giving you limited liability. See, that's corporate stuff as well, because men and women have strict liability typically, or what we would call the common law. So we hear the hesitation, we hear the defraud. When you start to see this, like I said, the Clean Water Act is really the legalization of pollution. And you see it that way, then how can you not understand what the legalization of cannabis might be? Or the legalization of air pollution, the legalization of anything. The legalization of murdering you because I got a badge and I feared for my life, and not many people would ask, well, if you're so afraid, what are you doing with a gun? Maybe we need to have you mentally checked for that or something. Wait a minute, the Supreme Court said you can be too intelligent to be a cop. What are you doing with a gun? How about psychologically stable? They said that too. What are you doing with a gun? No, we agree to this stuff just by complaining and not saying more. Not stepping up and saying, wait a minute, let's put some checks into the system. Let's make sure we get that disclosure. Let's go after these people that do outright lies. See, Dr. Wakefield, I mean, he can only do so much himself. I mean, he can't go sue this guy for this defamation as well. I guess he could, but he'd have to know about it, and he has to go do it. Look at all the cost and the time, and he's moving pulled away. But the pediatrician under Authoritas has license to say this under color of the CDC authority, and it's a lie. It's a fraud right on its face. The fraud by saying it, and the fraud of omission from disclosing that Dr. Wakefield was actually exonerated through a case through his colleague on that information. I'm not talking about vaccinating good or bad. I'm saying that we are promoted by a bunch of false, fraudulent information. You want to talk about fake news? You've just harmed yourself. Why? Because it's fraud. It's a crime against you. And really, when you look at the First Amendment, where you have the right to free to speak, and you find the government says that, oh, everybody can lie underneath that freedom, what is news, for sure, and how do you know it's fake if it is just freedom of speech? It's not fake, it's just free speech. And you're on notice, you could be lied to. Whoa, there we go again, responsibility in our face. And so, moving on, why don't we ask for this disclosure? Well, you can. Why haven't we? I don't know. I've asked all y'all to step forward and where you live and try this stuff out because it's there to do. Well, someone in Arizona, thank you very much, those of you in Arizona that pulled this off. I don't know where it's going to go. Arizona bill proposes full disclosure of vaccine ingredients. Well, I guess the product data sheet's not good enough. We're going to now make it a law, right? See how this all seems to work. But, hey, they did ask for full disclosure. That means that if that doctor was sitting in this condition, he'd have to explain in his article these ingredients and have to explain how they've either not been tested for their harm or they have been tested and what the truth is. And so, as I've told you long time ago, you have the ability to do certain things if you just step up. I think we talked about initiative or referendum. You can do those. The referendum comes from moving against a legislature that makes bad laws and you want to stop it. Initiative is when the petition comes out. Some states don't have one or the other, or maybe both. You may have to go to the legislature. I don't know. I don't look at too much anymore. In fact, I'm looking less and less. I'm getting more and more. I just notice my energy is getting focused down. If no one's going to be stepping up for themselves, then why do I keep knowing so much comprehensively? I'm just not really feeling that sort of love in that regard. So y'all are going to have to step up on your own, find out what it is. But here we go in and we have a legislator, whether or not they can do the initiative or initiative in this case. The state Senate is requiring, at least in a bill, healthcare professionals to provide a full list of vaccine ingredients and side effects to adults and parents. That's huge on its face. Whether or not it's deep enough, I don't know, but that's all depending on what the bill says and how it goes through. The point is, as I've told you a long time ago, you're watching problems that can be fixed by legislation. You actually have a better chance in states that have initiative processes where you can go directly. It's a lot of work. I'm not saying it's not. What I'm saying is we're not helpless. And that's still working. Now, you'll also get the bar members will attack you and make all kinds of challenges on your title and all that, but you're just going to have to do your due diligence on how you do it right. As I said, you do it right. Don't just ad hoc, throw yourself in it, and waste a lot of time. It may take a few weeks, months to research a condition, get a background, find out why it hasn't happened. You go out and you find out what's the resistance to it. If you can, you find out who wants it. In other words, when we were looking at the the smoke ordinance, it was, again, there was no resistance at the time I suggested it be put in for consideration. There was nobody in the forest fire smoke, nobody that was going to be against that. And so there's a timing thing. You got to look at the whole condition. And so this is a whole different thing. You're in a battle, in a war, but this is nothing less than your rights being you're taking your responsibility of your own rights. So in Arizona they did it. I don't know how much they did, but now they want to be more disclosure, fully informed consent. Now, that's not even confidence, folks. They just got to get you to say okay. See, they be careful on how they play this game as well. But notwithstanding, kudos to that start, at least the initiative to make a disclosure law. Why don't you do that on all of it, folks? I said you're going to have to battle this. These insane people are in the legislature and the Bar Association are killing us. But why aren't you interested in that? And then I look at this next thing, talk about the vaccines and what's in them, and we know that they're genetically modified and all this other nonsense. And you look, again, lethal injection, Clint Richardson, I highly recommend it. Take special notice to the Chapter 7, the USC, that he talks about the man as pest. And the Chapter 50 talks about that, again, the license we get, because we call ourselves sovereigns, we get to harm you. If we call you, say it's national security, that's your war powers, folks. If you don't get that, I don't know what to tell you. That's what you live under. That's what you've all lived under, a lot longer than any of us have lived that listen to me. And I've talked to you all about that. It's all there to see. You just got to be willing to see it. And then you got to sit back and say, wow, and now what do we do? And then you work that through because you're taking responsibility. Again, it becomes too big a problem and it's overall, but you can focus on little things, become like a sniper to take out certain little things as you figure it out. Well, this expansion of the GMO and what they want to disclose in these vaccines, that should be all of it. But the product data sheet's already covering a lot of that, so I don't know how far that's going to go, but it's going to get more wild, folks. I talk about Dejin out in this year coming out and being, the violating us and being the annoyances that it was going to be. Well, this little story pops up, kind of reminding me of that as well. And I want you to really think about this. Again, science and things like that, knowledge, gaining knowledge of the world, about the world, not of the world, but how this creation works out. What is this thing that we're just in and it just kind of functions? Well, we want to be the little monkeys that we is, and we want to start messing with it. That's where the genetic modification comes up. And I haven't got my first 4 questions done by any geneticist about this. They just kind of all of a sudden now realize it's a problem. They're going to sweep it under the rug about the unintended consequences of it all. But notwithstanding all that, someone wants to make it even better and easier for you to do. California biochemist sells gene editing kit to the masses. This is coming from technocracy.news. Technocrat-minded scientists apparently see no problem in spreading gene editing technology to amateurs in order to experiment with nature. Worse, there is no accountability or oversight. I want you to think about some of this, where I would say, we all should have our choices to do things and we should just go out and do it. Think about this in earnest. Think about the mentalities and the immaturity that's in the world right now, and hand them a technology that literally changes life, or the form of life, in the kitchen. This is not the kitchen biology, gene modification is not even new news. That someone's put together a kit would be seemingly a natural thing. I want you to consider the ramifications of this. They talk about changing the genetics of a frog. Do you think it ends there, folks? They talk about doing... The guy who does this does his own self-gene modification, so-called. He makes up stuff and gives it to himself. Do we want to give out into this immature, insane world the capacity to alter life forms in the kitchen? We can't even keep an aquarium fish from getting into the system that ends up becoming this predator in the leak systems. And we're going to be doing what they only call frog. We're going to change frogs. It doesn't end there. Think about this insanity here, folks. For where I would say, we can experiment. This is the problem of not being responsible. And what are we doing to our world? If you think it gets wild, watch out for this. Watch out for the guy who didn't think anthrax was good enough. And I'm going to do this in my kitchen. And he's lucky enough, he gets through his own problem and he makes something. And then it gets into the wild. I don't even know if I had the story. They were talking about, they found a certain type of a deadly thing, an antibiotic-resistant bacteria up in the seed vault lands, in the ice area. All that told me they can't figure out how it got up there, an antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Well, folks, we as a people are pretty dirty. One of the main things about NASA is the big problem about trying to keep all the stuff on the Earth from getting into space and maybe getting to different planets. And they can't even guarantee that. They try. And now we find some place that's got an antibiotic resistance that was found in India up at the seed vault. Folks, we got they can't even keep track of this stuff. And we're going to hand this to everybody in the kitchen? And with the kind of mentalities I see on the internet, my mind just wants to stop thinking right there. How about yours? You're going to want to have this next, see, you want disclosure now. You're going to want to have this next technocratic machine that I didn't respond to, it was like a couple weeks ago. When I saw that study that now we're going to have everybody in the kitchen who wants to can change all kinds of creatures and experiment on themselves because it's the cool thing to do. I mean, what people do with body piercings at all, folks, I don't even know where this goes. When you have a mind that says, I'm not good enough, and I want to become better, and I want to do things, and who knows, I want to have children after that. Wow. Talk about, escaping the Darwin Award and passing that on. I don't even know where this goes, folks. I don't have a clue. But they're having kits now that you can play games. I would have loved a chemistry set when I was a kid. I loved the growing sea monkeys, so-called. See, that was even a fraud. But anyway, it doesn't matter that it was shrimp. It was kind of cool. Keeping my tarantula, tarantula, I guess it's called. Doing all that kind of cool stuff. Understanding the world a little bit better. But to my mind, handing someone a kit that gives everybody the knowledge without training, without concepting, you see the scientists in China making people. Even with training, they start going crazy. Now you're seeing this going to be placed in the world, folks. Talk about the future and the craziness. It's got an interesting future coming. Talk about the jinn in the world. I don't know, folks. The cost of a mini lab is to be around 100 pounds. In the first phase, it will only be available to medical consultation centers. And after 2 years, the doctor will give it to the patient. And after that, the data will be transferred from home to doctor's office. Was a device that was made. You may have to keep track of this one as more and more people make these genetically modified organisms in life forms in their kitchen and start dropping them down the sink. And they start showing up in a lake near you. And you wonder what this thing growing on your side is by the time you get home by the weekend. Now, you may want to have one of these test labs that are now coming in just in time that are testing for different types of pathological problems. I find the coincidence of these things really interesting. I don't know if you do. I do. So I brought this forward. I wasn't going to talk about it because it just didn't have attachment. But after seeing that last thing, I think you're going to see an advent where, again, they're eating on you with one side to get you to do stupid human tricks to make life form changes. And then another company comes up and we'll make the device that proves that you've been afflicted by something you can't control. And you say, okay. But it's all here for us to do. It's what's coming down. And maybe they're telling us also, maybe the big criminal syndicate that we all are in, and the ones that we want to be the head criminal genius, we figure out we're going to get rid of our identity somehow. We go get operations. We scrub our fingerprints from our things. Well, you may have to consider that little kit pretty soon. You might have to change your DNA because one of the biggest at-home DNA testing companies is working with the FBI to give them your DNA. So if you don't want to be found out or made out to be a criminal, you might want to be able to change your DNA, wouldn't you? Isn't that fascinating, what they're giving to us? The little cherry red buttons they're dropping everywhere for people. Let's just push. We don't know that nuclear device will stop its chain reaction in our environment. Let's push the button anyway. Just 'cause. Family Tree DNA, one of the largest private genetic testing companies whose home testing kits enable people to trace their ancestry to locate relatives, is working with the FBI and allowing agents to search its vast genealogy database in an effort to solve violent crime cases. Now, let me just, I don't need to read no more. They make stuff up, folks. We said, remember, Israel made the ability, once they get this data, they can put you anywhere. If you become under scrutiny, they don't need to have a reason. They make the reason. Is it going to happen to some of my listeners? I doubt it. I say some. Hey, it might happen to one or two of us. The system is being created in order to do whatever the system wants to be able to put pains and penalties and punishments on people. Actually, I think it's backwards. It's punishments first, then pain, then penalties. That's your equal rights again. So, all this DNA information coming out, DNA testing, now with the family tree and the FBI, and now that kind of gave me an idea. Maybe you want that genetic modification kit. Maybe you want to go ahead and give yourself something that changes your DNA, because one of your family members ratted you out inadvertently, not because you were doing something wrong, but because someone at the FBI decided because you associate with the same genetic traits, you have the same predispositions. And as pre-crime precaution, because you're all enemy combatants, we're going to come and look at you a lot closer. If not, come and take you away. Aha. And that's not even a new story about the company, DNA testing company 23andMe has signed a $300 million deal with a drug giant. So not only it's not going to be bad enough that people in their kitchens can do this, the paid pharmaceuticals are going to get access to your databases as well. You know that's going to go off as public-private partnership contracts to go back to the government as well. But for those of you that did 23andMe, and I don't know about this other one, but I think it was Gary L. that posted an article. Says, in case you screwed up and had them analyze, quote, analyze your DNA, here's how to delete your data. So those of you that move quick, this is an old story. I brought this up. I didn't even get to this, but I figured I'd bring it in here. There's apparently a way to delete your data. I didn't read the article. I just want you to know this is the thing about data. You better get rid of it where you can. This is moving into a very dangerous area. Remember now, if they can make synthetic DNA like Israel can, and that technology starts to get out, and then you got people working in their kitchens, and this guy across the street don't like you, I don't know what evil geniuses do, folks. So you can delete your data quick. I don't know, maybe this might be too late on. Before pharmaceutical giant GlaxoSmithKline, remember, that was the Vax Not Vax maker. You identified it by the word Rix at the end of any name, that they make a Vax Not Vax. They have nothing but toxins in their so-called vaccine. Don't have an antigen 1, apparently. That's who's getting hold. These fraudsters are getting hold of this stuff. And makes a proprietary claim for your DNA. This has been that part has been news for decades, that they were going to come and claim your natural DNA as their property. And I think the court cases have said now if they make a little alteration, they don't get to claim the very first sample. They can claim the subsequent adulteration to it. Think about all this, folks. Think about how they're coming in and they're grabbing data out of the First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of access. You know, no one talks about your freedom of association. Well, actually, that's not an issue, is it? It's a private company that got you to buy in to what they offered you. You did. And I'm not condemning the idea. You'd like to know your ancestry, but this is what they do. They take something that you want, something fanciful, something that would be cool, and then they turn it into this trap. And we aren't that forward of thinking monkeys. And I say it that way because we're dealing in our animal nature for that. Principled men and women don't they know not to do this. And I can say that, then I have to say maybe my principledness was working when I look at all this stuff and say, no, that's a trap. I'm not going there. No, it'd be nice, but I don't care about the DNA lineage. That's a trap. Oh, Facebook, Faceplant. No, I don't want to go there either. Google. No, I'm going to go look at another company, and then I'm going to start putting up blocks. No, we're walking into a digital technocratic age that misinformation is what they do, why they're destroying anything that's any kind of good information. Why, I am wondering how long it'll take before the behind the woodshed's cut down, but I present what I do my way so that I will extend that potential. That's why you don't hear me talking directly on some things, but I talk a little bit around and say, no, if you are interested, you have to come to the point of what you want to do and do your own research, and I'll be there to guide if you need more. If we talk directly on certain points, that will set the red markers. I'm not here to prove something that I can be in a china shop as a piece of china with a bull. with a red flag on my face. I'm not going to do that. That's the problem. This is a battlefield. You do that, you get shot, you're done. The war's over for you. And this is what people I don't think appreciate. So, you look forward, you get principles, you say, well, all that stuff is not working out well. I told you the silent weapons for quiet wars. They set the traps for you to plug into. This is another one. Companies, now the government's going to these private companies, public-private partnerships, totally understood since the 90s, at least by me. And then that's what I could focus on and filter things through and get me quicker to the point that no one else really quite understood. A lot of people wouldn't listen to. It's kind of bizarre when you start hearing how that works. But anyway, so you get your go ahead and get your try to delete your DNA. If you ever did that test, don't put your DNA in other places. But you know, there's the technology to seek you out, and I have to ask you, why is that so important in a society that's supposed to be free of forced associations and land of the free, home of the brave nonsense? Why is this such a problem? Is because you don't live in that place they told you. And so thereafter, you think you're protected by the First Amendment. You don't realize it's not even applicable, and they have ways to work around it. And it was set up to be worked around anyway. And so let's move to the Second Amendment. And then let's move into what I said, the digital currency. We got to be careful. And what they give us may not be what they are offering. It looks good. It'd be nice. But it'd be cool. But do we really want to do it? Back over to someone I'm a little bit critical of. They keep talking about the cryptocurrency as being applicable in lots of places. I've talked to you a few articles of this gentleman. I don't know too much. I don't talk to him. I don't know, but I just have this ill feeling, not about him, but it may be the belief system that's built up around this cryptocurrency, that I think this article, going after things that of people, a certain class of people who believe, it's certainly not going to be the liberal, I don't want a gun mindset, and it may not be the people that don't believe in the cryptocurrency for the fact that it's controlled by government. That's not even what I'm talking about here. And I'm not talking about guns necessarily, but I'm talking about the setup for the takedown. But like no different than you send your DNA in, here some company comes and offers a cryptocurrency so you can easily, oh no, it says easier, sorry Vince, to make it easier to buy guns online. Again, set up for the takedown, to offer you a tool that certainly looks cool, certainly would be neat. Why not? I can put cryptocurrency, cash in for a cryptocurrency, and I can slowly build up that account to buy a gun from a company. Well, when I think about that, it's not decentralized, and that's in control of the guy who's got the blockchain, isn't it? And it's not even a currency, is it? Is it really? At long last, says the article, a blockchain-based digital token designed to make buying and selling guns easier. Why, yes, of course, it's called Freedom Coin. I really want to stop reading because it really starts to torque me a bit here. I'll read a little bit more, even so. ICOX Innovations, the ICO Innovatin team that brought you the controversial blockchain-based image rights management platform Kodak One, is launching a new, quote, regulatory-compliant corporate currency, quote, close quote, tailor-made for the patrons of gunbroker.com. The online firearms merchant boasts over 4.7 million customers and 600 million yearly transactions, according to the press release Tuesday by its CEO, Stephen Irvin, says it can be painstakingly brutal for his customers to deal with traditional credit card companies and other financial institutions. There's got to be a better way. Introducing Freedom Coin. Enough said, folks. Let's get to the point of what I saw there. This reminded me when I was a little kid in a family that didn't have a lot of money, but you needed to keep going. You needed to get your clothes on your back and your shoes on your feet. And you know what it's controlled by Gunbroker. You put the money into it, and they make this token, so-called. All that meant to me when I saw that, it wasn't decentralized, non-corporate, money, currency actually. Isn't it just a ledger, the receipt of which is this token coin that you would have gotten had they given you a stamp to put in a book when you did layaway a long time ago? Isn't this just corporate-controlled, centralized digital layaway? And my problem with all that part is the promotion of this. And here's the point. Blockchain is a digital storage of a ledger. Nothing more. Oh, you can attach whatever coin token, whatever you want to call it, any image, any number sequence, attach it to that account. But isn't it just a financial ledger? In the contract side, a ledger of contracts. It's just a digital sheet of paper. And yet they're promoting this as helping to save you to do things that the fiat system can't do for you. In fact, they're bringing it into utilizing the fiat system to convert into their holding until you get your gun. Nothing different than what used to be a layaway system. Cool. I have no problem with that point. But to promote it as a cryptocurrency is a danger in my eyes, in my mind, about other people's impressions and perceptions about this. This is nothing more than a socialistic attachment through corporate control. This is I can't say it's the epitome because there's some other problems. This is the problem with cryptocurrency, so-called. Again, it isn't yet privatized the way it's supposed to. It isn't really decentralized. And in fact, some people I've been reading about, not that I read a lot, but I come across, there's a problem right now with actually decentralizing. And I don't really understand it all, but they're actually saying you're going to have some centralized nodes to actually work some of this stuff. I don't know. I'm just looking at what even the people that are doing this stuff are talking about. But to come out and say this is a cryptocurrency when in fact it's just digital layaway, and you're having to take your fiat, and you still, what do you send your money, your cash in by envelope? You can already do that. You can already make a contract with that company to say, listen, will you take layaway? And they can agree. And they receive your money once a month, your cash, whatever, your fiat, whatever you call it. They don't need this. Certainly electronic mobile phone connection, that makes it so much more convenient. But is it really digital currency? Is it really right? Is the disclosure of saying it's a digital currency actually correct? Or is this just a way to transfer funds into a layaway account? I have no problem with that. Whatever you can agree with the person who's supplying whatever you want. But see, this is the problem I have with all this information that's coming out. The way you frame it. Freedom coin, really? Freedom from what? Freedom for what? The freedom to put money with them periodically in order to finally get the money, because you couldn't put it underneath your mattress enough and long enough to get the gun. You had to hand it to them because you weren't responsible enough to do it yourself. That's usually how that works. And when I can see it very clearly, when you got a family going on in big time, you want to get that money away because, boy, there's always an excuse when you're running a family together. The kids will just suck that all up. So you put it away because it's just easier. But is that actually a digital currency? I don't think so. I think we're looking at more deception. I think we're looking at the setup for the takedown. I want to see a truly privatized thing, but it's not. I don't see it right now. And in the middle of it, who cares? I mean, like I said, it's Wild West right now. Go for it, big time, quick. But be careful on what you start buying into and attaching your guns to it as well. See how they do that? It's really just a commercial plan to get your money. It might be valid, but it's no digital currency. It should never be. A layaway plan should never be promoted as such. And so what about this you needing to buy into their digital systems and plug in and more information that you're going to have to give and records that you keep with private entities? That's your agreement. Then we find out little technologies that start coming along that we wonder what these companies are doing and for what purpose. Well, we see it's for commerce. My question then is, why don't you think it's about you? And if you come to the conclusion maybe it's not you, then maybe we got to step back and think, well, the actual ulterior motive. So you make an agreement to use a digital layaway. That's fine, great. You can do that. Let's not commit a fraud here by saying it's some kind of digital currency. It's simply a ledger. Your token is simply a receipt. You can package that any way you want. You can make them look like stars. The receipt could come out looking like a gold star. It doesn't matter. It's all the same stuff that, oh, you gave them money this month on layaway. But what about you going to buy something? You get down there and you go by and they got a camera facing on you. Well, what's that camera doing? Well, we're hearing facial recognition. They could be tied into more companies. They could be selling the fact that you walk in the store now to get your gun. They take your data from you. But even worse, we got some interesting things. The companies like Walgreens, Nestle's, and Coors more use iris tracking cameras to spy on shoppers, is a story that comes here. So you could do your digital layaway. Now they have all your information on keeping that account for you. Now you walk in and you confirm that you're that, and then there's a camera there that's, well, so just go from the guns to your food. Something even more important every day because it is that. You don't got food, you ain't lasting long. Walgreens, Nestle, and Coors. You got the manufacturers and you have the sellers. They have iris analyzing, tracking cameras in their coolers. Who comes up with this stuff? And you have to submit to that to go buy something? Well, you have the choice, I suppose. I don't know if I need to read more. They are putting iris and facial image scanners in these coolers. And they got them in ice cream for your kids. They capture all this stuff. And that wasn't bad enough. And they call them smart displays that'll actually respond to you, talking to you, interacting as we take our AI and anthropomorphize it. As I talked a couple weeks ago, the anthropomorphized antagonists. You don't even know they're not working for you. They're not really for you. But they're there and you think they're real. You think you can interact with them. And there's just somebody else back there looking. And I think I talked about this but didn't have the link. When I saw that story about the cameras and the facial recognition and the distance between the camera and the consumer, so-called, this little report popped in my mind. Whisper Laser Tech sends audible messages to specific people. I think I mentioned this. Don't think I put the article in. The team started with a laser beam that fired a wavelength absorbed by water. Fired at wavelengths absorbed by water. By sweeping the beam at the speed of sound, they found that it could be used to generate sound that can only be heard at a specific distance from the transmitter. That would allow a message to be sent to an individual rather than just anyone who crossed the path of the laser. I don't know if I need to read more. When you look at the distance this is now, and they're going to expand it as they work, it's kind of interesting. Again, the technology is just cool, just beyond type of cool. It's using resonance and distance over a pulsed laser beam that causes a pressure wave at your ear that you can hear. Literally, it's not in your head now. They have the other one that works in your head. This one works literally in the air. And they can tell you something that you hear like a whisper. Now, I referred to it as somebody in a meeting, and they could tell that person in a meeting at a distance, and so you could communicate with somebody by light without communicating. You could still tell them stuff at a distance. This, combined with a iris scanning camera, could actually put out a laser beam as well, and they can talk to you, folks. You want to anthropomorphize something? And this is a technology that's coming to convince you to do things. What if you're walking along, again, remember, they're tracking your phone and your signals and all that, and they can track in on, like we found it last week, and they start putting the signal, and they just put a beam. It doesn't take long. Just put a beam down at some distance, and then you walk through that space, and they tell you something. A little suggestion. You think, what did I hear? Because it's a whisper. You keep doing that to people. What happens? I don't know. But you get to do it, don't you? And they don't have an ability to stop that. You walk to those places where they got cameras looking at you, they can also put the technology down. They can talk to your kids. Think about that one. Go get the ice cream, little girl. Do you want to continue to use these companies, or do you want to send a letter and say, stop that, I'm not going to come into your store, period. Zero. Nothing. I'll go without ice cream. I'll go without frozen food. I'll go without your beer. Horrors! I'll have to make it myself. I might have to grow hops, same family as cannabis, instead of cannabis. Oh, well, I can't use the pot that comes from the cannabis plant anyway. I think I should make some beer. So we have alternatives right there, but the point is the technology is coming to persuade you, to interact with you. And it's funny, the first time I saw that article about the whisper technology with the laser, I was thinking really closed system where I'm talking to someone and I don't want anybody else to hear it, but I want to be able to interact with them. Almost legitimate in that regard. Again, I don't think that much farther, but today I'm thinking, you know what? That technology that's looking at my iris and taking my pictures and speaking to my kids literally could be speaking to my kids now. So, what do we do? I mean, this is the problem. It's fantastic stuff, neat technology, but what's its use? And this is the one they're telling us about, I guess, is the other problem. So think about all that. I don't know what we do with this. It's there, folks. If we start not acknowledging it, and then think about it, when they get you in a state, and then, I mean, it keeps going on and on and on. As I started to think now this way, it kind of gets wild. But you think all of a sudden you just get whispers in your head all the time. You hear noises, folks, that drive anybody nuts. And if someone don't like you, that could start happening. The technology now just kind of spreads everywhere pretty quickly. Like now they're going to hide, the genetic modifications industry does, by putting it in everybody's kitchen. Now there's no one that they can go after. Why? Because everyone's doing it. We don't know where the cause came from. Oh, that wasn't ours. Oh, we got interfered with by some kitchen magic. That wasn't us doing that biological now we're harmed. I mean, it's just on and on what these people can come up with now. I don't know anyway. So, and what about this technology? Here, we keep going. It's going to be a continuous problem for us. The technology being run by people and relied upon for their things. I mean, I can see the utility for it. The phone is a portable phone. The mobile phone's perfect. I mean, excellent on its own. I mean, how much more at peace can a family member be to know that someone's out with a phone, and in case they get in trouble, they can get that phone call? That wasn't even part of my younger life at all. You waited on people's time. You had to wait for them to get somewhere. If there was, bad weather, you had to wait for them to call you. Well, now it can all happen pretty quick. It's a good thing. My thought was a good thing. But then you find out what's actually happening. The little benefit you get is nothing compared to the benefit so many others without your knowledge are getting. And you can't shut that off. You walk into a store, they talk to you. You can't not associate. You've agreed when you walked in. I'm asking us to do this stuff. Tell them to stop before it gets there, because once it gets there, people just agree with it. And while you're saying no, you get to tell the people that may not even know about it. This is the thing about the 5G. What do you do about it? Well, you're going to have to engage the way you have to do that right now is to engage the administrative process. I don't have another answer for that. And while you're doing that, you give people the example of how that gets done. If you're being quiet, pretty soon everyone's getting whispered to. And I'm saying, I see the immaturity of society. They may not understand how that works, and they may be adversely affected, not just withstanding what they're told if they want to trigger people, folks. Look about the idiot that wants to just play games behind this technology, just to see what you do. Kind of like someone like myself. I'm kind of glad I don't have this technology. I get to be kind of a practical joker at some point. Because life can be a lot more fun than what we make it out to be. But that's not mine to do. I know that there's other people out there that will, though. In fact, I don't see this as any much more than a practical joke to be able to talk to you utilizing this technology. If they'll go to cameras, taking your irises and checking your kids and building databases for you just because you want to go buy a Coors or go buy something Nestle has to water, all the water that they've stolen from you in aquifers and now sell back to you. The Walgreens. Talk about the wall. They want to make all that information. They want to play with your mind. You're going to leave that? Do you let that happen? You think they're the only stores that are doing it? No. It's going to go as soon as they figure out these are the test beds. Now, what about this background that's doing this? Is artificial intelligence. They're not doing any of this analysis without this character recognition programming. And so we have another story comes all together again, telling it just to tell us the tale. What I just tried to give you the notice of what's out there. Everybody interested in this? Probably nobody's interested in it, but if one of you is, maybe you can step up and start doing a more proper thing. Maybe you have friends that are violated by this, that they don't understand. Maybe this will give you an idea of what you're walking into as the government starts to criminalize everybody. Artificial intelligence is already sending people to jail and getting it wrong. How many times did I tell you about that, folks? Again, admissions coming out. As machine learning algorithms, big data methods, and artificial intelligence are increasingly used in the toolkit of U.S. law enforcement agencies, many are worrying that the existing biases of the criminal justice system are simply being automated and deepened. You think, folks? Toolkits. That's the word I tell you about. The World Bank toolkits. How to destroy any society. And here's that word. It keeps coming. I notice the word's coming up. It's creeping back out again. It's it creeped out for those of us studying underneath the global governance Agenda 21 situation and the IMF and the fiscal impositions, your debt slaves. Those of us that were researching that a decade or so ago when it started to rear its ugly head as we had access to the information from the internet, we saw the tool, as I told you, the toolkits all the time, but now it's coming out more in more places within the system itself. Police departments are increasingly relying on predictive algorithms to figure out where to deploy their forces by blanketing cities with a mesh of human-based and computerized surveillance technology, including but not limited to data mining, facial recognition, and predictive policing programs. You think that's not going to be something that Walgreens is not going to be using a contract back for their images? Or Nestle? Or Coors? And then the cops get to talk to you, folks, through that little laser that's talking to you 3 or 4 feet out. They can go up to 8 feet, this device. Maybe making suggestions. Maybe the FBI gets involved and gets you all set up in the right stuff and tells you, well, why don't you buy this and why don't you that? You know, you could make a bomb. It's already happening in real life. Why wouldn't they do it so covertly with all this technology? And what are they doing? We hear it. And this is to me, this wasn't even a story. It came out again. I think it's just being regurgitated from the 90s. Main Core government, quote, threat list names at least 8 million Americans who will be detained when martial law is imposed. This was a big deal back in the 80s, this whole point right here. But now it comes out, you see it in a more actually relevant position where those lists are being made, where the data is being gathered, where we see, since, as I told you, went to crickets, we see the executive expedience. Remember, all the cops are in executive side. Expedience. They get to do what they get to do. Why? Because it's national security, they said. And no one challenged that. No, they changed America, and people said, okay. The threat list names 8 million Americans. Is that you, folks? Now, I looked at that. First of all, I said, well, from the 90s mentality, that leaves about 3 to 10% that they don't name. So that means there's still room for the resistance, folks. So, yeehaw. But the point is that they're coming out with this discussion called Main Core, and it actually it's a governmental database, again, that is believed to have existed since the 80s. Like I said, this is when the 90s, they started identifying these things were available. This is just, I think, as the internet just starts to make itself more available. Now, I was out of touch about all that even way into the late 90s, so I just was barely into that the internet was even available. But I was in contact with people. At the time, you talked with people. You didn't have phones, mobile phones. You had to talk with people. In the 80s was a very interesting time. In some part, I felt encouraged that the American people would be able to do what they needed to do to stop. I don't know that that's any more the case, but I was really encouraged then because there was a quiet organization that was really throughout anybody that I knew Everybody had a thing to do, folks, if something went down. And they're all looking for it. In the 80s, they thought it was looking like things were going down. And I was a little bit on the outside of the imperative of that, but there was people that we saw the news. We saw how it was happening. And there was stuff being developed underneath the skin. No one even understood. I didn't even know until I was approached to listen to what I was told. Everyone had their place. And you realize that when people start to do that, there's a seriousness coming on. Well, these lists were being made. And apparently the name of it was Main Corps. And so, if you think you're not going to be... But they had all their standards. The standards were not yours. The standards was the government's. Whatever it felt was a threat. So you think that you have to have reasonable suspicion. The government just has expedience. And they've had that for a long time. And I'm suggesting to you that we now have evidence here that this has happened in the time when the people in the 80s, now moving and mobilizing in the 90s, had the sense that it was going on. Certainly denied at the time and no way to get at it. Well, they reference Snow Job Snowden here about bringing it out. And I really wonder whether or not that's just the plan, so that you think it's not important because, what happened? Oh, now that you know about it, big deal, nothing ever happened. Well, it continues, folks. And if you don't think that it continues, and you think that you're dealing underneath some reasonable suspicion, probable cause and all, at the point of what they do on the administrative side, here's the now coming out court case that says Ninth Circuit upholds use of Fed's terror reporting tool. The Ninth Circuit, remember, this is the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, reviews cases from USDC courts that are not competent and reviews the correctness of their appeal, on appeal, and makes decisions. It also happens to be the most so-called progressive or liberal judges in the country that I understand. It's also over 71% wrong in its decisions when those decisions goes to the Supreme Court and is accepted. But they, Ninth Circuit on Tuesday, upheld the government's use of terror reporting tool that critics say puts innocent Americans on a watch list that, like just for being Muslim or engaging in innocuous activities like taking photos in public. You know, that struck me when I first saw that just taking photos of was something that put you on a list. Being a photographer, I did that for a long time. Just went anywhere, took pictures. Whatever looked good to me, I captured it. I was all over the place. I was in places you weren't supposed to be. Partly just because you weren't supposed to be there. But I thought it needed to be, it was neat looking. Something was cool about it. It had something about what I was seeing I wanted to capture. And again, we live in the land of the free, right? We go anywhere. We're not doing any criminal activity. So just taking pictures, and we learned this back when America changed, so-called. You could be considered some terrorist. Well, here we are. A unanimous 3-judge panel held that reasonable suspicion is not required to share information about people suspected of engaging in terrorism-linked activities. Terrorism-linked, they haven't defined all this stuff, but here it is, terrorism-linked activities, because suspicions are not, quote, the product of investigation subject to a higher standard. Tips and leads required only mere suspicion, a lower standard than the reasonable suspicion required for criminal intelligence data. Judge Millen Smith wrote in the panel of the 19-page opinion. The link here, you can get that, read it, you can read it. You see how they split the hair to justify literal crime here. But what isn't criminal when the FBI is looking at it under any suspicion? Under the presumption you're an enemy combatant, folks, is not stated, discussed in this position here. And purposely, they're not going to want to get to the point. Again, I start reading, I want to read the article, but it's nonsense to read it. What you have to do is you have to read it, understand how they attorn the condition, how they misframe the condition in order to come up with an answer that is going to put more punishment, pains, and penalties on you, and that's justified as an equal right. Appeals court, police do not need a reason to place Americans on suspicious persons lists. Okay, the proof is out, what I've been telling you for years. You don't have to be someone who doesn't do anything wrong. You could be taking pictures of some. How many phones are out there that you hold up? I'm taking a selfie, or I'm even just trying to read my screen. Oh, some police officer somewhere, some code enforcer, some snitch, some informant now says, oh, they were taking pictures of the front end of that store. And you get on the list. They go down, track your car down. Oh, let's pick a little bit further. They think it's actually, they believe the informant's correct. You got one of those no digital displays. You get 2 or 3 blocks down the road, and all of a sudden a big X shows up on your digital display. You get pulled over by the cops. Now what? Okay, do you think it's fantasy, or do you think that putting 2 and 2 and 2 and 2 together? Police don't need a reason to place you on a suspicion panel. Now go look at the TSA, folks. Now, this is all an appellate court decision. It could go and change. But the way they're framing this is it's going to have to be straightened out if it can get to the Supreme Court. When you see this problem, you could sit back and be crickets. This is your future, folks. You're looking at, it's said in the memes. I've said it before myself because I think it's right. And it's also the bird of prey, left or right wing. It doesn't matter. They're just going to get they're a bird of prey. The left jackboot or the right jackboot on your neck won't matter. And the way they've got there is because they allowed you allowed them to call you names and treat you like you were somebody that could be presumed other than innocent. And these decisions were made by these attorneys promoting the global agenda. They're promoting and protecting the war condition. That's apparently transparent to everybody because I hear hardly anybody even engaging this with me at all. And I can just tell you without having anybody else, it's useless for me to gauge it more than just hold it inside as an observation until we would have something to go do with it. And so I tell you, those that get involved with this, understand what I'm telling you is what's happening. And when you go out to do, if anything, if you get beyond being a cricket and you decide to do something, you better take cognizance of this real condition that's transparent to most all y'all. And you will have to acknowledge it, and you then can work through it. If you don't acknowledge it, it will do what? It'll punish you. It'll put pains on you. It'll put penalties. It'll charge you taxes and fines. It'll do everything that's equal rights to all the other slaves that don't. Police don't need suspicion. If you thought you lived in a constitutional republic, that innocence is presumed, that it takes probable cause to do something, that you need a warrant to do anything that's against an innocent man or woman, shake yourself awake, please. And then we still have a job to do once you figure out what's going on, that these names they call you are the setup for the takedown, that they then conform their activity to justify it because of the presumption that they don't tell you, that the courts take what's called silent judicial notice of all this and don't tell you. And when you ask them about it, they don't tell you and answer it. They give you this curt little response because you don't know how to get at it. And the way you get at it is you assume it to be in fact. Why? Because Lieber Code said in an occupied territory, you know them when you see them. You know them by their deeds. They don't have to tell you. That's on you. And so, what's the evidence that these types will call you names and get away with it until you stand up? Very interesting what goes around the world. Very interesting how you can relate. I tell you that out there. You look out there in the world, it reflects back on you. If you're anybody that cares. If you're anybody that really understands of a responsibility that people had to themselves. And then has to really arrest the crime, notwithstanding the occupation and the military force that you're up against, or the military system. Whether it's transparent to you, you see parts of it, or it's occluded at some point. Whether you euphemistically say it's behind a curtain and think you're pulling it back, I don't care. You're going to have to do something at some point, and euphemism's not going to cut it. We have an interesting story about how this works, that the occupier can call you names, and you still can fight back. And there's at least still an awareness in the world that when someone does that, it's not okay. Now once I tell you this little notice here to us, I'm going to point it back to what they do in the United States and have been doing. And how this shows whether you're going to identify whether the world has a better moral compass and the United States doesn't, or the United States is going to have to admit to something that it's doing wrong, that has been doing wrong, and for all the reasons we know. But you'll be one of the few, because I'm already on this one myself, that will be able to start pointing it out, and you're going to find out how weak this so-called sovereign, this bully in the world that can destroy countries whatever way they want to do, this United States government, how weak it really is, and why it's so clear to me if we just had more of us. Pro-Palestine group wins UK High Court battle over terrorist label. In a blow to Israel, a British High Court, it's not the blow of the Queen's Bench, this is the High Court, has ordered World Check, a subsidiary of Reuters, to pay compensation to pro-Palestine organization listed as a terrorist group on its global online database. I guess that's all I want to say. There's nothing more to me to say. Right there, someone challenged someone's defamation as a terrorist of what they were actually doing. And a high court in UK, don't get this wrong, this is done in the UK. Here's the reference of the high ground in the moral ground in the world, still there, that we can then pull from to understand how wrong it's going on in the United States, that no one, well, except someone I know, responds to something that they call you a terrorist already in the country United States of America, and not many more than a gripe will address the problem. They said over the terrorist label. What in this country, United States of America, is that terrorist label for those of us who may stand up, research the law, step forward, say, here's the law, we want the government official to stop, and this is the way the law says it, and this is what you're supposed to do, and by goodness, I want some accountability. And what does the government now do, besides calling you an enemy combatant? They say what? Oh, you must be one of those sovereign citizens. Well, I don't know if anybody's kept up with that term. I tell you this periodically. That term is by the FBI determined to be a terrorist. Now, what if you're not? And what if that's a tactic? And what if no one's actually addressed that? You become the pro-Palestine group that hadn't filed the case in the UK to get the answer that you can't defame people by throwing a label on them. This is an evidence for those of you anywhere to see what I've been telling you about challenging the fraud that they have imposed upon us, that we now see as the war of terror. They're the ones who are the terrorists. That they are able to get you under the label of it. It can be wrong, and that's wrong, and that's how you challenge it. This little story will tell you about that. Now, the damages weren't very much in money, so this is the other point. When I do a lot of this, we're not doing money, we're doing equity rights. Now, there may be equity compensation, but that's not how you write the paper. You write it to fix the problem, to remedy the harm. And so the money value here is not, it's only $13,000 plus legal fees. But even so, any dollar amount is indicative of a harm that they have to be compensated for. The point is the more dangerous thing about labeling, and incorrectly so. In the UK High Court, they recognize this. Well, the UK courts also recognize that the it's an adjective. A criminal justice system, so-called justice is really the oxymoron. The criminal justice system in the United States is inhumane. And as I wrote on Twitter last night, do we need to know more? Where the Intercept is talking about the freezing prison without heat, that's redundant. If it's freezing, it obviously has no heat. I guess we're going to drive the point home, but it doesn't matter. When we find out that UK courts also show that the criminal justice system of the United States is inhumane, do we need to know more? Do we need to know that the building's frozen? Do we need to know anything more? No, it's inhumane. It's already a crime, as I keep telling you. To have that system utilize the term sovereign citizen or anything else they deem to be a terrorist, enemy combatant, the presumption on an executive expedience condition where you just heard the courts are giving it license to exist. is the thing you have to focus on if you expect in the future to have any kind of a protection. Is what this reflection from the pro-Palestinian group at the UK court, and they did an interesting argument here. It kind of blew me away what they did, and surprisingly, I've done it myself in the issue that I'm addressing with our issues. That they claim that this designation from the Israel group actually harmed the UK government. Is the same thing I said when they came and they made a defamation of a friend of mine that was actually attempting a remedy for a harm against the grant. We're in the mining law now. That it harmed the obligation of the United States to enforce its obligations. That I argued the very same point that this argued this, that it's not just that it harmed this group, it actually harmed the government before the court of which that they were saying we want remedy. I just said something really fast there, but you can untie that a bit. You'll start to see how you go after these guys. Again, what I talked about, if we get into admiralty and neutrality, didn't I just say a commission there in neutrality and an obligation owed by the sovereign that is being undermined by its own function elsewhere? So here we have a nugget of how you address that the terrorist label, where it's wrongly placed, is unlawful. Not just illegal, it's unlawful. And that I'm saying to you, look how you address that same condition in the United States. It hasn't yet been done. For what I'm doing, we're just in the formative stages of developing that. In fact, I'll just let you know, in developing it and doing the first response to that allegation, there has been no response by the bully, the one who made that determination without anything. And that's their other problem. So they may be able to have a suspicion, but they can't take it and put it into any action. And when they go in action without proof, they become liable to doing what they just did. And this pro-Palestinian group case in the UK is our first evidence if we needed it and didn't understand it. Because they want to bring you into that status. You're already there, but they want to perfect it. And now we're knowing they don't need a reason. I keep telling you that. I don't know if people appreciate this danger. Why it's so important to respond correctly. Not just respond because you think you know. You respond on where their Achilles heels are, and there's a ton of them. If you just sit back, do some research, and rethink what you think is reality and really get into what they've really done to us. I guess I'll go one more thing. Prisons across the United States are quietly building databases of incarcerated people's voice prints. What did I say about that? Voice prints, folks. You think it's focusing on the incarcerated. Yes, they're doing that, but listen, tell Alexa, tell Siri, tell you think they're not getting voice prints? And I'm going to require, again, they don't need a suspicion. They don't need a reason to be suspicious of you. They just hear you say something. They create a voice print. And let me remind you of Adobe's project called Voco. They can once they get your voice print, they can have you say anything. And this is the brave new world you're walking into as crickets. I'm asking us to do different, step up. That last little story in the pro-Palestinian group is big, folks. If you just get a hold of that, understand what I'm saying about it. And then anyway, appreciate you listening today. Grimmer, thank you for what you do at reallibertymedia.com, folks. Donate as you can, where you can. And folks that are disseminating the broadcast and the content, thank you very much, very, very much for all your energy that you do that and get the word out. And don't let them get on you at all, folks. There's just no reason for it, and there's no reason to not respond, I suppose, because it just means our acquiescence and our consent, and they take that as a confidence, and they'll continue. I'll be with you next week. Tech diffs or nature will.
Well, that's another lesson. I hope with today's information you can take it to those that misbehave. From behind the woodshed, leaving his mark on the beast, this is Hal Anthony. Till next time, journey with purpose.
Well, that's what opening up a can of whoop-ass feels like.
Son, you just opened a whole case of whoop-ass.